This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us virtually for this discussion, Conversations on Spirituality and Faith, with authors Michelle Andrea Williams, Amy Clipston, and Gina Napoli. And so in this panel discussion, we are going to be discussing books on spirituality, finding yourself and your faith, and especially during these difficult times and after the pandemic. Author Amy Clipston is joining us in place of Suzanne Woods Fisher, and she has sold more than 1 million books and is best known for her works on Amish tradition, lifestyle, and also romance. And next is Michelle Andrea Williams. She has published 2 novels and workbooks, including the S.C.A.R.S method on healing. And our last author, Gina Napoli, she is currently she works currently as an author in Harrisburg, and she is going to be talking about her novel, Clunk on the Head.
Thanks for having us, Natalie.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
And so for starting, I would just like to ask you all just some general questions, and feel free to chime in. How would you define faith and or spirituality?
I can take that. I think of spirituality has, I think in today's culture, become kind of a secularized term. So I'd like to talk just about faith. And the best definition I can think of for faith is being in touch with that part of yourself that believes in something you can't see. Something that you have absolutely no earthly way of knowing something, but something that is heavenly, that fills you up, something that you know in your heart without having to have proof of it. So the Bible tells us that there's a still small voice, and that's the voice of the Holy Spirit. The book Clunk on the Head, which is actually an anthology of 28 different stories, 12 different authors, we've all chronicled our different direct interactions with the Holy Spirit, and that's the clunk on the head moment that we talk about. And sometimes that clunk on the head is just a still small voice, just like that builds, enters into your heart, and you know absolutely that it's the Holy Spirit. But in order to know that, you have to have faith.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That was a lovely answer. Thank you, Gina. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to add to what Gina said. I can't wait to read your book, Clunk on the Head, because that's
Thank you.
usually how it works. And I've had discussions with people in the past, and they've asked me, do you really hear the voice of God? And I'm like, it is that still small voice that you truly know is not you. One, you would never think the things, and two, it's uniquely challenging in my experience. That the more I dove into a personal relationship with God, it was things that He was directing me to do that I would never challenge myself to do, and things that make me slightly, if not very, uncomfortable. And so in order for me to grow and become more like the person I believe He designs each of us to be, and that's part of the faith journey. That's part of being in a, I guess you would say, spiritual relationship with the Creator, is that still small voice, typically challenging.
Mm-hmm. And what books, articles, or essays have you recently read and really enjoyed?
I can jump in. And this, I don't know, maybe this is kind of a half answer, but years ago, my fellow writer friends told me that when they published their own books, they didn't have time to write anymore, that they were spending so much time marketing and working with the publisher, doing all the things on the back end, the business end of writing, that they just didn't have time to write anymore. And I thought, oh, that's crazy. And then it happened to me. So I've been on this virtual book tour for a few months now. I've been spending a lot of time just rereading my book, as silly as it sounds. And I don't say that for vanity reasons, but it was more to get reacquainted with my stories, because when you go in a venue like this and people ask you about specific stories, you want to be able to be eloquent and not say a lot. So that was my goal. And really, I have been doing that a lot, just practicing and working on the business end of it, if you will. Although I do enjoy these things. These things are a lot of fun. I get to meet new people, but I can't say that I have read anything super earth-shattering in that regard, save my own book. Sometimes I do feel it's one of those books that the more I read it, the more I see something new. Even though I put the darn thing together, not all the stories came from me. Some of them came from other authors. So it was nice to be able to rediscover parts of the book that I had kind of forgotten about or tucked away.
Yeah, there's always.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead. No, I was going to say one of the books that I read over the last probably about almost 2 years ago, I think, but still profoundly affected me. And I love reading about other people's faith journeys and their discovery of, who they are, and finding out the secret discoveries of God along the way. One book that I thought was intriguing, and I picked it up and I read it, and it was so in-depth and thoughtful. It was Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus by Nabil Quresh. And Nabil Quresh, who passed away, I think a year and a half after he published this book. But just a profound journey, an open conversation about the faith that he grew up in and the faith that he found. Just the intimate details that he allowed us to see and offered us as part of his discovery of his own faith and spirituality.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Could you repeat the title of that novel again?
Sure. Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus.
Well, I want to thank Gina for her honesty with what she said about reading her own books, because I work full-time and I pretty much write full-time. And for the past year, I've been working from home, which has its benefits and its challenges. I actually have a commute to downtown Charlotte, North Carolina, where I work. And between my commute and working in the office, I would love to listen to books on audio, because when I'm home, I'm working my other job, which is writing. And for over a year now, with working from home, I honestly have not had time to read anyone else's books. And I've had back-to-back deadlines. So I just want to thank Gina, because I was sitting here thinking, what book can I say I loved when it's been so long and I've had the time to read for pleasure? So I have mixed feelings about, they say that we might go back to the office in July, and I have mixed feelings about it. But in many ways, I look forward to having the time to listen to books on audio when I'm doing data entry or sitting in the car, in traffic with everybody else. My mother has lived with us since before my two children were born. So she's been living with us for more than 20 years, and she sits next to me while I'm working. So I can't really listen to an audio book while she's sitting there, because I feel guilty. So anyways, I just want to say, kind of piggyback on what Gina said, that I look forward to reading wonderful books when life gets back to normal, whatever that might be.
Mhm. Yeah, the new normal with virtual everything. So can you all briefly describe your writing process and how you overcome writing challenges such as writer's block?
I can't honestly say I have ever had writer's block. A teacher years ago gave me a really good piece of advice to put together a folder or a box or something, some sort of repository, and throw scraps of paper in there whenever you have a little idea. And mine is full of cocktail napkins or excuse me, it used to be full of cocktail napkins and lists. I have lists for my lists, things like that. And I sat down one day and I put them all in a spreadsheet. And I have little memory joggers next to each idea. So if I am ever bored, one of these days I will find time to peck away at fiction. But I don't know that I will get there. I'm a very firm believer in leaning on my strengths and outsourcing my weaknesses. And it's taken me a long time in my life to get to that point. One of the things I've learned about myself is that I'm pretty darn strong with creative nonfiction, and I am not so strong with regular fiction. I don't have any imaginary characters banging around in my head or anything waiting to get out. I have a lot of, I come from a technical writing background. I have a lot of details to share. I've been told I'm somewhat of a know-it-all, and I love to write instructions. So that's where I live. That's my bread and butter. Those are the things that I like. I've also been doing theater critiques for the Berg. So once I have an idea, something that I want to write about, or even if I've been given an assignment, I will spend a little time thrashing it about in my head. And once I get that hook, once I write that first paragraph, and I have some semblance of an outline, it doesn't have to be a perfect outline, but I have all the ding, ding, ding high points that I want to hit, that's when I will sit down and write it. It might take me a couple of tries. If I get an hour to myself without a dog asking me to go out or a kid asking me to drive them somewhere, I'm lucky. So I take that hour when I can, and I just, have a timer, sit down, bang it out, and come back a different time after it's banged around in my head a little bit more, and I'll flesh out the rest of it. And that's kind of my process.
That's great advice. And just like Amy, I work a full-time job as well. I work for a healthcare analytics company out of Boston, and I manage remote teams. I have 7 people on my team currently and 3 interns, so I'm quite busy. And how do you carve out that time? You just do it. You just set a schedule. I'm very methodical. Spreadsheets are my life. It's wonderful. I love it. And so, setting goals for yourself and setting a daily regimen or weekly regimen of what you're going to achieve for that week. Things get left by the wayside, like my vacuuming might not get done that week, but I'm pounding stuff out. And so being creative also, because I also have rheumatoid arthritis. And so on the keyboard all day, every day for 40 hours, it gets weary. And so I have started using speech to text, which has been very helpful because I learned through the process of creating audiobooks that the way I type and the way I speak are 2 different forms of writing. And so if I have the intention of doing an audiobook on my book, to speak the text is very helpful. And then I can go back and edit, but I do a little of both, more so in the winter times. I do more speak to text than I do writing. But just trying to find creative ways to make it happen.
I've written more than 40 books, and I'm about to start my first book in my 6th Amish series will be out in November. And back in 2009, when I was writing my first Amish series, when I started the second book, I hit the worst. I hit a brick wall, and I had the worst case of writer's block ever. And the line editor I was working at the time sent me an example of an outline, and I now use that outline for every single book I write. And I outline my books chapter by chapter, scene by scene, and I use that as a roadmap. The story changes, it grows. I'll add scenes, delete scenes, but I always know where I'm headed. And I've actually taught my outlining process to a couple of different writers groups, and a lot of folks have found it to be helpful. And if anybody ever wants to see my outline, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to share it because I think we should all help each other. But I've found that being very methodical, like Michelle and Gina said, and the more work I do on the front end, the easier it is to write the draft. Like if I hear conversations running in my head while I'm outlining, I'll type out the conversations and copy and paste them into my draft, and then I polish them and change them and embellish them. But the more work I do on the front end, the easier it is to write the draft. And I just, when I'm on deadline, I make time for it. I will write all weekend long, just take breaks to eat and sleep. I finish my day job and I write until I run out of steam. And like Michelle said, you know, I set goals and then I try to beat those goals. If I say I want to write 10,000 words this weekend, and then I try to write 15. I'm not saying all books go that way. Some write themselves, and some I say are like having my teeth drilled. I have to push the characters through. But I just set my goals, and I've turned in all my books early. I had to ask for one extension, and that was when my father passed away. But other than that, I just work and work and work until I get that draft done.
Thank you, Amy and Michelle and Gina, and my condolences to you, Amy, for.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. And I guess it's you know, a little more about prioritization and flexibility, adaptability, and organization skills. So how do you think the Christian publishing industry has changed in the past 5 years, as well as now?
I think publishing as a whole has really changed. It's just more open. It's become more accessible. Anybody can publish anything they like without, you know, fear of being edited. Sometimes that is a very bad thing. It's created some opportunities for, you know, indie publishers and things like that, but I wouldn't say it's necessarily different, that Christian publishing is necessarily different from regular publishing, probably with the exception. The only thing I could really think of is that Lifeway publishing went by the wayside. And I think that was a really big blow for the Christian publishing industry.
Yeah, I think Gina's right. My husband works for Amazon, so I know all about the KDP self-publishing, and the market is just stronger and stronger, and especially this year with COVID and the new norm. There's a lot of people being creative out there and getting their works published. One of the things that that has been untapped that will continue to grow is audiobooks. People who are published and self-published, and you know, it's great to do the Kindle and the paperback, but there's also audiobooks out there that is going to, you know, continue to grow over the next 5 to 10 years. I think that, like Amy said, she loves to listen to audiobooks on the commute when she was commuting. But that's it's a huge industry, and it's something that I think more and more authors are getting into. Even those who have published in the past and had not even thought about it are now getting into audiobooks.
I would say some of the challenges have been that since there are fewer brick and mortar stores, especially Christian bookstores, it's been more of a challenge. It's really competitive, especially in the Amish genre. It has exploded. And so there's a lot of competition for shelf space as far as mass market, like the Walmarts out there. And I can say from a marketing perspective, I'm doing a lot more marketing than I was 10 years ago, doing a lot more Facebook Lives and things like that, trying to reach more readers. There's a lot of opportunity, but also I do miss the Christian bookstores that I used to go to and do book signings and things like that. But it is very competitive. There are a lot of folks writing books out there, and it's exciting. I talked to my publisher a few weeks ago, and she said when COVID first started, book sales were down, but now people are back to reading books because there aren't as many shows on Netflix. Everybody's gone through Netflix, watched just about everything that's on there. She said, so people are reading again. It's really exciting. So it's an exciting time and in some ways a challenging time, I would say.
Yeah, and audiobooks are especially great for those who are visually impaired as well, and just in general, anyone. So what is one piece of advice that you would give to those interested in wanting to become authors or writers?
Authors or writers in general, or a Christian author?
Just in general, any kind of author, writer.
I would say something that Gina said earlier. She knows her strengths and weaknesses, and she outsources those that invest in a good editor. Top of the line advice. A good editor and somebody to design an amazing book cover.
For me, I got my start with a local chapter of Romance Writers of America, and I would say talking to other authors really, really helped me. There are many people along the way who helped guide me when I was trying to find an agent and just polishing my first book. And there's American Christian fiction writers. There are other writer groups, and I would strongly encourage the folks out there trying to write their first book to find somebody that they trust to read their books and give them constructive criticism, not tear them down. I did experience that with the first critique group I went to. I was torn down, and you have to pick yourself up and dust yourself off and keep going, but find somebody that you trust to read your book and give you some pointers, and then find other authors out there that you trust and learn from each other and share. And that's what really helped me get started.
Yeah, Michelle and Amy absolutely have it on the money. And segueing into money, I think it's one of the surprises I had is I needed to be okay with not making a lot of money. Publishers years and years ago, they would do a lot more marketing for your books. And that's, if you get into a small or medium-sized press, they don't have the money for that. They want you to have a platform. They want you to be able to come in with a way to sell books and be able to do that marketing yourself, be able to kind of stand on your own 2 feet. I haven't really gotten too much help from my publisher, and I don't know of any authors who have, save the few that teach at colleges whose names everybody has heard, and they have more press behind them. So I would say with have a platform, have a way to get your word out, and be okay with maybe not making a lot of money, especially if you're a Christian author. The whole point is to help spread the word of the Lord. It isn't to rake in coin.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think
everyone.
I heard the mantra of message over money for Christian authors.
So I will start by asking you all specific questions. So first, I will start with Amy. So have your great novels, The Jam and Jelly Nook and An Amish Barn Raising. So what first do you remember sparked your interest in writing, and what type of genre did you first want to write about?
Well, I'm a romance author at heart, so I love stories that have a romance thread in them. And so when I first started out, I wanted to break into the romance genre, and I tried. And I had my first agent was Mary Sue Seymour with the Seymour Agency, and she suggested that I try to write Christian fiction, and she pointed me toward Amish fiction. And I grew up in New Jersey. My father was a German immigrant, and I grew up in a Christian household. And I remember visiting the Amish as a child in Pennsylvania. And since my father was a German immigrant, I always felt a very loose connection to them, since they speak Pennsylvania Dutch, which is loosely connected to German, not exactly. So I read a book by Wanda Brunstetter, who's one of the first two major Amish authors were Beverly Lewis and Wanda Brunstetter, and I just felt led to try to write my own Amish story. And I came up with an idea for a story. I wrote the first 3 chapters and then had blurbs for books 2 and 3. And my agent sent them out to publishers. And I am so grateful to this day that an editor at Zondervan, which is now part of HarperCollins Christian Publishing, which is the umbrella for Zondervan and Thomas Nelson, that she took a chance on me, an unknown who hardly knew what I was doing. And it was such a tremendous blessing to me, because at that time, my husband had been through 1 kidney transplant, and his kidney was failing, and he was going back on dialysis. And I'm so grateful that Zondervan took a chance on me, because my husband was too ill to work full time. And it was just a tremendous blessing for our family. Between my full-time job and the books, I kept a roof over our heads while we went through this second kidney transplant journey. So, and I'm working on my 6th series now.
Thank you so much, Amy. So you mentioned that you work 2 full-time jobs, one as a author as well as for the state of Charlotte. How do you manage your work life and your personal life?
Well, I'm very, very grateful that my mother lives with us, and I have to give her all of the credit for keeping our house running while I am snowed in under a deadline. My father had a massive stroke in 1994, and then in 2000, my husband and I built a house together, and my parents moved in with us, and then my father eventually wound up in a nursing home. But my mom has literally been there since my children were brought to us in the delivery room, if you will. So my mom has just always kept the house going. She makes sure the laundry is done, that there's food on the table when I'm snowed in under a deadline. And I'm just grateful that she's there to pick up the slack. Because I'll be honest with you, my teenage sons and my husband are in the garage working on cars and not worried about the laundry. But yeah, I just, like I mentioned earlier, when I'm on a deadline, I just make sure that I get that first draft done, and then I can take a deep breath. And like Michelle said earlier, the vacuuming does not get done. The Roomba will not make it upstairs until my first draft is done. There'll be piles of clothes in my bedroom. But I just kind of let things in the house go to the wayside while I make sure I get my books done. And then once that draft is done, I take a deep breath and kind of come out of hibernation and worry about putting clothes away and running the Roomba.
Yeah, so yeah, lots of working first and prioritizing that, and then relaxation and
yes.
So today we are going to discuss the Jam and Jelly Nook and an Amish Barn Raising. So let's start with an Amish Barn Raising. How did you go about writing this novel? And also, can you briefly describe your writing process?
Sure. So Amish Barn Raising is a novella collection, and my publisher will come up with these topics such as a barn raising or an Amish picnic or an Amish summer, and then they'll ask 3 or 4 of the Amish authors in with the publisher to come up with a novella to contribute to these anthologies. So my story is actually a spinoff from one of the books in my Amish Marketplace series, which the Amish Marketplace series is a series about 4 cousins who each have a booth at a fictional Amish marketplace. So book 3 in this series was the coffee corner, and I took a minor character, his name is Anthony, and wrote his story. So it's a story about Anthony, who makes gazebos for a living, and he's been friends with Catherine for a really long time, and they finally decide that they want to start dating. But Catherine's father is kind of a traditional old Amish gentleman, and he thinks that Amish folks should work with the land and with animals and should not create gazebos to sell to Englishers, which we're Englishers. Englishers are non-Amish folks. So that's what the story is about. And I wanted to take a minor character and tell his story because I think readers who enjoy the series will want some more stories about those characters. And for my writing process, like I mentioned earlier, I always outline my books chapter by chapter, scene by scene before I start writing. And since this book is in the hero and the heroine's point of view, I kind of volley back and forth between the hero and the heroine. And there's also a dog in the series named in the story named Fred, and that's Fred on the cover. Mm-hmm. So that's a little bit about the story.
Thank you. So can you elaborate on which story from this novel was your favorite and why exactly?
Well, my story is the one I talked about Anthony and Catherine, and it's called Building a Dream. And so Kelly Irvin and Kathy Fuller also have stories in this novella collection, but mine is just about, I took the brother of the main character from the coffee corner and told his story. So I'll be honest with you, I haven't read Kelly and Kathy's story. I'm really sorry. I'm embarrassed to admit that. But, mine is called Building a Dream, and I just haven't had time to read the other 2. But I'm excited for this new book. It comes out April 6th.
Great. I mean, just looking at the cover and everything, it looks very, very intriguing and very loving.
Thank you. I'm so grateful for the cover designers at my publisher because I just think our covers are just very eye-catching, and I love the purple and the blue and the sky and the clouds, and I agree with you.
How would you recommend people go about embodying the Amish lifestyle, even if they are not Amish?
I think that as far as, did you say embodying? Is that what you said?
Yeah, like embodying like that general view.
When I talk to my Amish friend, I have an Amish friend who lives in Gordonville, Pennsylvania, and she lives on a dairy farm and has 7 children, and she is just the sweetest, most soft-spoken, wonderful person. Whenever I talk to her on the phone, I just get this happy feeling, and she just has this calming way about her, and I just really I just love the way that they bring God into everything that they do, into just every conversation. And she's so grateful and thankful and hopeful. And I want to be more like her every time I talk to her. And I just think about her all the time because she works so hard on her farm. There's always something to do, and she's just always so grateful for everything that she has. And I think when I talk to her, I just want to be more like her and to have more conversations with God than I do. I know that I don't pray enough. I'm not thankful enough. I I don't appreciate the things I have in my life. And I know that she does. And I still remember a conversation I had with her son one time. The last time I went up to visit with her, one of her sons, I think it was her oldest son, was going out hunting, and he was going out bear hunting. And so my friend will host dinners in her home as a way to make money and also to introduce people to their culture. And so we were there at a dinner, and her son was getting ready to leave to go hunting. And I was thinking to myself in my mind, I was like, so what do they do when they get a bear? Like, do they make a rug out of the skin? Do they eat the meat? Like, this is new. My husband would go deer hunting. Like, I never knew anybody. So I said, what do you do when you get the bear? And he goes, well, how did he put it? Something to the effect of, well, with God's grace, I would feed my family. And I was just so taken aback by that, because, no matter what they do, they always think of God and thank God, and they're so grateful for everything. And I know me as a person that I need to do that more. I need to be more thankful and more grateful for everything that I have, because I'm sure that I take things for granted. My husband's had a lot of health issues in the time that we've been together. And there are many times where I've felt that darkness, and I've been so ungrateful and angry. But looking back, I can see how we were carried through that. So that, to me, that's the most wonderful thing about the Amish culture, is that they never forget to be grateful, and they always remember to say their prayers and thank God for what they have.
That's a lovely way to view life, even through hardships in this current pandemic.
Yes.
So now let's talk about your novel, The Jam and Jelly Nook. How did you prepare this topic and the story?
So it's the final book in my Amish Marketplace series, and it'll be out, I think, May 4th. It's my 5th series. And when I was getting ready to pitch my series to my publisher, I called my Amish friend up and I said, okay, I've written about women who worked in a bakery in my Kauffman Amish Bakery series. I've written about Amish women who worked in a hotel in the Hearts of the Lancaster Grand Hotel series. I've written about young ladies whose father owned a harness shop, if I can say that, in my Heirloom series. And then my 4th series was the Homestead series, where it was about 4 siblings who lived on a dairy farm. I said, what do you think I should write about? And she mentioned that 2 of her daughters would go to market a few days a week, and they would get in a van very early in the morning and drive out to Philadelphia and run a market. So when I go and visit her, I love to go to Bird in Hand. And most of my characters live in Bird in Hand, Pennsylvania, and there is a Bird in Hand farmer's market there. So I decided to write about 4 cousins that each own a booth or run a booth in the marketplace. And the first one was the bake shop. The second one was the farm stand. The third one was the coffee corner. And then this is the Jam and Jelly Nook. So it's about the 4th cousin. Her name is Leanna, and she's a widow and has a teenage son. And she runs her Jam and Jelly Nook, and she believes her husband passed away from an accident. She believes that she'll never find love again. However, when her 16-year-old son gets picked up by the police in the opening chapter, and she goes to the police station with her father to pick him up, she meets a widower. And his daughter was with her son because they had been to a youth gathering, and they went off on private property and went swimming in a pond, and then they were the 2 that got picked up by the police. And so Leanna meets this other widower, and they find out they have a lot in common since they're both raising teenagers by themselves. So that's what the story is about.
Very interesting. So lastly, what spiritual, or just in general, what themes do you believe are most important throughout this novel, and how do they relate to your life?
For me, the themes that always seem to find their way into my novels are faith through hard times, and that is definitely something that I know a lot about. My husband's had 2 kidney transplants I mentioned earlier that he was going back on dialysis when I got my first book contract for my book, A Gift of Grace. And it'll be 10 years in June that I donated a kidney through a swap. We wound up matching another couple, and at Johns Hopkins on June 14th, 2011, I gave a kidney to a woman, and that afternoon her husband gave a kidney to my husband. We wound up matching another couple. And so we've had some tough times together, and also most recently he's been out of work with a neck issue, but I am happy to report that he is getting ready to go back to work after over a year of having two neck surgeries. So for me, I think everybody has been through some hardship, whether it's facing a health crisis or a financial crisis or grief, or, we've all been through hard times. And those are the times where we need to remember that even when we feel like we're alone, we're not alone. So that's the theme that weaves its way through all of my novels, and this book is the same. Leanna is going through a hard time. She feels like she can't reach her son. He's being rebellious, and she thinks she's a terrible mother, and so that's what always finds its way into my books. And I hope that my books will help folks either strengthen their faith, or if they're going through a hard time and they've lost their faith, maybe it'll help them find their way back. And I hope that God uses my books in that way to speak to my readers.
Thank you very much, Amy, for your descriptions of your books and their themes, and also just general guidance for our viewers.
Thank you.
Next, we will move on to talking with Gina Napoli about her novel, Clunk on the Head. So you first worked as a civilian for the Navy. Before your first job, what was your passion? What did you see yourself doing?
It's funny, if I could go back and have a conversation with my 18-year-old self, I'd have a lot to say to her. You're her unjaded spirit, and I'd probably sit her down and say, "Oh, honey, there are so many things I have to tell you." But writing has always been a passion of mine. I always thought that I don't want to say how old I am, but I thought by this time in my life I would be a full-time author and be able to support myself on that. And the more I've talked to other writers, even someone as prolific as Amy, you still have that other job that keeps you going. So thank you for not making me feel so bad. You've got a lot of novels under your belt, and it's a tough business. Publishing is a tough business. So but writing is really what fuels me. And I think that harkens back to my earlier advice. Don't be, have a second job. Don't be too hard on yourself if you can't go full time with it.
Mm-hmm. And in your novel, Clunk on the Head, you describe how the Holy Spirit has guided you and others through various points in life. During your travel on the highway to your Navy position, you mentioned an instance where you receive a message from God. Can you explain what that was like, if you remember, and how it impacted the events thereafter?
Sure. This was probably about 13 years ago. My daughter was 3 years old. I was working for a micromanager at the time. And I don't know if any of your viewers have ever had that happen, but I know for me, that was one of the most invasive experiences, is working for someone who doesn't really trust you. And I'd always been trusted up to that point. I was really looking for a way out. I had 3 interviews lined up for a different federal agency, and I was very excited about them. I was so excited. I was a little full of myself at the time, really prideful. And I thought, I'm going to go to all 3 interviews. I'm going to ace all 3 of them. That phone will ring 3 times for me. I'm going to get all 3 jobs. I'm going to have my pick. And my phone didn't ring at all. So I had to have a humbling reckoning with myself and with God, just to get broken down a little bit so that God could build me back up. And I can remember one instance driving to work. I was actually getting ready to drive my daughter to daycare before work. And I wanted to have a nice cry. So I jacked up the radio. I didn't want my daughter to hear me. And I gripped the steering wheel, and it was this ugly, all over the place cry. And I said, God, if I am going to work for that other agency, will you please send me some sort of sign? And I'm still blubbering all over the place. It was a long prayer. And I heard my daughter yelling, Mom, Mom, all the way in the back of the minivan. And I turned on the radio. I said, what do you want? And she said, Mom, I said the answer is yes. I turned around and I said, what did you say? And she said, I said the answer is yes. And then my 3-year-old daughter just went right back to playing with her stuffed animals. I said, well, how do you like that? And right away, I got that prickle on the back of my neck. I thought, that's God. That's God giving me that message. And I thought, well, my life's a movie, right? Any moment my phone's going to ring. But my life isn't a movie. So it took about 8 months for the phone to ring. It was for a different federal job, but it was with that same agency. And it was for a job that was a better fit than the other 3 that I interviewed for initially. What it really was, my daughter voicing the Holy Spirit, it gave me a lot of hope for those 8 months, because anytime the things weren't going right, I would think back to that moment where my daughter said the answer is yes, and I knew that was God. So that helped me keep faith for those long 8 months while I waited for God's timing.
That's amazing, really. Throughout your novel, there are themes on importance of prayer, power of listening, and supporting others. Which theme from these 3 do you believe is the most powerful aspect in leading one's life through the Holy Spirit?
I'm going to harken back to something Michelle said at the beginning of the talk, and it was about discernment. Sometimes you hear a voice in your head, and if it's something you want to hear, that is probably not God. That's probably you filling in the blanks. Mm-hmm. So really, you need to have discernment. And in order to have that discernment, it takes a lot of listening, a lot of prayer, and a lot of meditation, putting aside some time to reflect and to be able to receive the Word of God. It's, I think, one of the things that in our very busy go here, go there world, we miss that time. We miss that time for reflection. And so we don't always catch the message.
Mm-hmm. How did you go about preparing to write this specific novel, and what inspired it?
I have to say, I wasn't planning on putting a book together. I do a lot of articles, but books, longer works, aren't my strong suit. I think that's why an anthology rather than, it's more of an anthology so much as a novel, but I think that's why it came together the way it did. And my plans, right, not God's plans, I wasn't planning on personally sharing my stories because I didn't want people to think I was nuts. I mean, I'm having personal interactions with the Holy Spirit, direct interactions. And I thought, if I tell these stories, people are going to think I'm crazy or I'm off my meds or I need meds. So I kept them to myself for a very long time. And as I went forth in my journey to know the Lord better, it became obvious that He wanted me to write these stories down. He wanted me to share them. And just going back to that whole feeling of connectedness that Amy was talking about, that you're not alone, that I wanted to bring other authors in on the experience too. I didn't want this to be a Gina Napoli project. I didn't want this to be a vanity project. I wanted this to be something that would honor God. So I made sure that I had other authors who had a story to tell that were similar to mine, where they had that clunk on the head moment. And I brought them in on the anthology as well.
And from those 12 authors and their stories, which one or two speaks to you the most and why?
There was one story that I had a lot of time to talk to God about, or I took a lot of time to talk to God about. It was a tough topic. And I think for a lot of modern women, the topic of submission is very, very difficult. So one of the authors submitted a story called, I think it was God's Home Run or something like that, but it was about submission, where her husband was out of work for a long time. She was trying to, and then when he did get back into the job market, he was underemployed. She was having a really hard time not prompting him, not henpecking him, not saying, did you get your resume done? Did you go on that interview? All the things that, I don't know, I'm that kind of wife. I like to poke and nag, and that's kind of where I live. But she was having a hard time with that because she wasn't getting the results that she wanted. And she had a moment where she said it hit her like a baseball bat, that God let her know, your husband is the leader of the house, he's the leader of your family, and you're trying to lead him. That's not your job. I'm letting you know that you need to take a back seat. That's my job, to lead this family, and I'm going to lead it through him. It was a really hard message for her to take. She said she was deeply embarrassed when she realized that she was not playing her own position in baseball, as it were, or in volleyball. And when I read this story, it was one of those that I kind of put that one on the back burner because I was having a bit of a hard time digesting that myself. And I think a lot of strong women have trouble with the concept of submission, but there it is in the Bible, where your husband and wives weren't meant to be equal. So this was one that was most convicting for the Holy Spirit to put that on my heart to include in the book.
It's very inspiring. Thank you. As a parent as well, how do you recommend other parents go about teaching their children about the Holy Spirit or another higher being if they are not spiritual?
I would say it depends on the age of your child, and I don't pretend to be any great expert in child rearing, but I do have a teenager and the scars to prove it, and she is my last one. So countdown to empty nest. Can't wait. But anyway, there is a popular the popular Bible verse. It says, "Teach your children in the way they should go, and when they're older, they won't stray from it." I'm sure I'm butchering that, but unfortunately, at a certain age, kids do rebel. This is something I've learned about teenagers, especially, is they are going to get messages from their peers rather than from authority figures, parents included. And while that's unfortunate, it's just the way all the teenagers are wired. So my recommendation is to find a church family with a very strong reference group full of kids who can help lead your child down the right path. You know, you're known by the company you keep. And I think it's really only fair, because I know that even when, if I have a little pride layer going on and my kid goes to speak truth into my life and I know what they're saying is true, it's hard to take from your kid that you're not doing something right. So I tend to go toward my peer groups as well. So I think we're all kind of wired that way.
Especially that human connection. Yeah. And would you say that that also is like some advice that you would give to our listeners, that human connection as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, I was just even thinking about my book. it's kind of a coincidence. I didn't write it during the pandemic, and that wasn't, to me, whenever we took classes at the Navy or Department of Defense and they talked about the worldwide pandemics or talk about any kind of pandemic, to me, that was just something I never imagined would happen in my lifetime or in my country. That was, to me, just something that happened in far off places. But now that we are hopefully on the tail end of it, it really made me think about God's timing and how my book is just, this virtual book tour is hitting the tail end of this pandemic. And my book is really, I'm more of a Martha than I am a Mary. I designed the book to be a small group, focus group book, not a Bible study per se, but there are a lot of Bible verses in it. But it's designed for those Wednesday night groups or Saturday nights, so you can really get to know your neighbor. There are discussion questions, exercises you can do together, things like that. So it's something that, as we're coming from out of the pandemic, we have to kind of relearn our social skills. I don't know about you. I start to get funny here in my teleworking with, just my dog to talk to all day, no coworkers. So it's really just something that we can use to re-engage and get back out there, all of us.
Yes, I agree very much. Thank you very much, Gina, for your for discussing this novel and just general perspectives on life.
Thank you.
Yes. And lastly, we will talk with Michelle Andrea Williams. Thank you, Michelle, for joining us again.
Sure.
So in 2017, you published your first book, Finding My Damascus. How did you go about writing this book, and who or what inspired you to write?
Well, this book originally started out as a combination of 4 years of journaling through my own faith and spiritual growth and journey. And so I started pulling out excerpts from my journaling that I thought was relevant to be able to share a story of faith and building a relationship with God and redefining in my mind who I thought God was and who I realized him to be. And so I started out with that, and after about 3 years of really working hard and trying to get all this into some semblance of a story, I just, I really heard a message from God of just rip it up and throw it away. And so I did. And so that was hard to do because it was years of work. But I thought, if this is not right, then it's not right. And this is not what God is leading me to do. And I just need to start over. So what I did was, in about 6 weeks, I wrote the story. And it was God's story. And really the message that I got was, write my story. Speaking from God, write my story about you. And so finally in spring of 2017, a few months before I published, I threw everything away and just started over and just wrote the story step by step, piece by piece. And I pulled it together based on God showing me his love for me, the love that I came to know for myself during that journey, and the love I was gifted with in the form of my husband, Greg. So that's what the journey was about, of forgetting what you think you know and really truly connecting with God on what he knows about you and redefining that whole relationship.
And you also have a spiritual process that you created called the S.C.A.R.S method that you feature in your book, Tending the Beloved, Healing Wounds into Scars, which is here on the screen as well.
Sure.
If you're comfortable sharing, can you briefly discuss your own struggles and how they helped you write your books?
Sure. So I as a lot of people have experienced, I've experienced trauma in my life, and started when I was a teenager, when I was molested by a male family member, and not an immediate family member, but one that was close enough where it really rocked the family. And my father was a pastor at the time, and telling my parents, they did believe me, but during the 1980s, that was not a time when therapy was big. And so, although they believed me, I really didn't receive the help that I needed emotionally to get past that trauma. And, throughout my 20s and 30s, just making really not healthy choices in my life, just having a warped view of myself from that experience, and then like putting myself in more and more situations that redefine that just solidified that view of myself: unlovable, unworthy, inadequate, and on and on. So when I began to have this was in my 40s, when I began to have a spiritual awakening, a moment where everything I had done didn't matter anymore, that all of the decisions that I had made were obviously wrong decisions. And I was at the very rock bottom, and I had lost everything, and I had been married and divorced twice. I lost the house that I had purchased on my own. I walked away from the last marriage with my car and my clothes, and it was hard. So in that moment, and that was more than a decade ago, in that moment, I gave up and gave everything to God. So the S.C.A.R.S process is that method I didn't realize God had put me in until I was through it. And that was to truly separate from the idea that we are unloved and unworthy, and get clarity on who God says we are and how he created us to be. And then to assess my life at that point, what I done wrong, and what the failures were, and what I needed to do to get myself to that place of sufficient healing, of um, redefining who I was and rediscovering who I was and who God was. And then finally rebuilding that definition of myself through God's eyes. And then sharing that with the world after I had finished that entire process. And that's the basics of the S.C.A.R.S method, of being able to rediscover who we are and who God created us to be.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I can't imagine what how that felt, going through that, and such strength to become the amazing individual you are today.
Thank you. And there's so many people out there who have suffered equal and so much worse, just so much worse. The people in the healing community, the other authors that I've talked to who have suffered years of neglect and trauma, and just to see who they are now is a testament for God bringing them through and saying, your life doesn't define you, I define you.
Thank you so much. You also hold a master's degree in business management, and you now work as a data specialist manager for a healthcare analytics company. Why did you choose to pursue a degree in business, and how do you manage your current careers as both writer and data specialist manager?
Well, my business career really started over 25 years ago, and that's dating myself, especially when I said I was a teenager in the 80s. And I am an empty nester, so way to go, Gina. Get ready, it's wonderful. We have 5 grandchildren. My husband and I got married 9 years ago. We have a blended family. And And, when we first got married 5 years ago, we had 4 grown children and a grandbaby living with us. So it was not honeymoon right off the bat. It was a huge challenge. But God ordered our steps through our courtship. We waited until we got married before we consummated our marriage, which is something people just don't do in their 40s and 50s. So it was an ordered relationship. It was a spiritually and emotionally intimate relationship that we began that carried us through some really, really difficult times. My career has always been my bread and butter. And just like any author who's out there, J.K. Rowling has a castle and Stephen King has wonderful places, I'm sure, all over the world. But most everyday average writers are not going to make a living off of writing. And so having that career is, full-time job is super important to be able to support our writing passion. And so writing came much later for me. And I have a master's in business because I truly enjoy training people, employees, and seeing and watching them grow. And so I'm very much like Gina, I'm a very technical writer. And I love instructional things of how to get through processes and help people succeed and be successful and grow. And that just translated into my writing life. Writing my first book, Finding My Damascus, was my spiritual journey and my relationship with God. But the subsequent workbooks that I've written have been instructional workbooks to be able to help people rediscover and find things out about themselves that they may not know otherwise. So my career life and my writing life kind of coincides in that way. I'd love to see my employees succeed. I shared with them this week, my 10-year goal for them is for them to all surpass me in the company. Like, I want you to be my level or better. Like, their success is my success. So that's my passion in writing is when somebody picks up my workbook, I want them to have equal or better success than I did by using the same methods and going over the same questions and asking the same things and implementing the same processes that God showed me to do in my life.
It's a great approach. It's like a teamwork approach and equal perspective. Mm-hmm. So your workbook, Tending the Beloved, features 4 chapters on identifying wounds and healing with the guidance of a higher being. So if you're, I think I said this question. Can you describe an emotional wound and its relationship to healing?
Sure. So one of the things that my husband and I experienced in our marriage was the loss of a child. My stepson Brad was 29, Army veteran, disabled, and he overdosed on drugs after suffering, multiple accidents and injuries and traumatic brain injury. The drugs he took were not enough to kill him, a normal person, but his body was so broken and damaged, it just took his life. So that was in 2019. Prior to that, my husband and his first wife, Tish, lost a child over 30 years prior to that, a young daughter, 8 months old, to muscular atrophy. And so the trauma and the grief and the loss that one feels does not change with time. You learn to deal with it. And so witnessing both of them and the family and my own grief when Brad passed away, that just came back full force, all of the grief and all of the loss that they felt with Gwen 30 years prior. And it was 30 years within the week that she had passed away, that Brad passed away. It was heart-wrenching. I cannot explain how heart-wrenching it is to go through or to witness someone losing a child. It's just one of the most devastating things anybody can ever experience. However, my husband is so wise. Sorry. He's so wise and so in touch with how God sees him and loves him that God understands, because he gave his only son for us. And his son did die on the cross for us. And he knows that his God understands that pain. And so that gives him solace, even though he may feel it deeply to the core of his being, the loss, and will continue to feel that loss throughout his life. He knows that he can live with it and deal with it and learn to live around that grief, because God knows. And so the healing that I talk about in all of my workbooks is sufficient healing, because we're not fully healed until the day we walk through the gates and we're in Jesus's arms. That's plain and simple. We're not fully whole until we're there. But God can call us to a sufficient healing to be able to deal with the traumas of life. And that's because he knows exactly what we're going through, and he can meet us in that moment at our lowest depths and our highest highs. We're never too far away from him, or we're never too far down in our own feelings of loss and inadequacy that he can't be with us and sit with us in that moment.
My condolences again to your family and to the family that you discussed and mentioned. Yeah, and I'm deeply sorry for what they had to endure, experience. I can't imagine how they felt.
And neither can I. Neither can I.
Mm-hmm.
I just almost like an outsider looking in, and that was really, it was hard to navigate, but I just, it was hard to navigate, but it was easy to give them space. Easy to give them space because they needed that. My other stepchildren, who are all grown with their children of their own, they all needed that space to come together as a family and heal. And so the conversations between my husband and his first wife and my husband and his children, that was necessary, and that was part of the process. And so I had to do a lot of self-checking to make sure that I was being the supportive person, and go to God for my own healing and not rely on anybody else, because my goodness, they were going through so much. So my reliance on God during that time helped me to help them and give them space to heal, and whatever they needed me to do, I was willing to do. But yeah, that was quite a journey, and we're still not through it yet. And there's still moments where we hear, a song or hear a motorcycle go by, and we just sit in the grief for a little while, and then just move on.
And so I guess, like, would that tie in with like any barriers that our viewers face as well, and how you think that they can cope with those difficulties, and work with them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things is to be honest with yourself and give yourself a lot of grace to feel the feelings that you feel. Assess it to make sure that it's not overwhelming you, and that you do get professional help when you need it. Depression can set in, thoughts of suicide, things like that that can really hinder us living our everyday lives, and reaching out for professional help when it's necessary. And sometimes it is necessary. A lot of times it's necessary. But having an open conversation with God, I think, I think people see God as this all-knowing being who, is up there somewhere and doesn't want to sit down in an intimate, open, ugly, you know, ugly crying conversation with someone. And oh boy, does he ever. Like, that's his most precious moments in my mind, of his children coming to him and just laying it all out and just saying, this sucks so bad. I hate this. I don't want to go through this. Asking why. Like, he'll show us why, and he'll show us reasons behind the things that we're going through. It may not be what we want to hear, but if we're really open and want to have that personal relationship with him, he's ready for it. He's ready to show us and have us come to him. And it doesn't mean that we're going to be okay the next day. It just means we came to him and he's there. Like, in some moments, that's all that's needed.
And just one last question. For those who have different beliefs and denominations, would you suggest they apply the same process on healing, or another process that fits their traditions and customs?
That's a good question. It's something that I try to be mindful of when I do my writing, because I do write from my belief, my Christian perspective, but I do want people to see value in the processes that are laid out. What I do say is that everyone is unique. God created us that way, whether you believe in God or a divine force or something unknown, that we're each created in a unique way. And so our perspective and our process of healing can look very different from someone sitting next to us. So whether it's a denominational belief or a different cultural belief, just really being open and honest and intentional with yourself, and with the time that you spend in prayer and meditation, being intentional about that, and making sure that that's a part of your normal life. Like, it's just very important. And then whatever you believe in will guide you. Like, I believe, for me, that God guides me in every intentional step that I take, that he's with me in the moment that I ask him to be. And so I think that can transcend across different cultures and different belief systems, where they just sit intentional with the force that they believe created them. And I think that God will be honest with them and show them what they're seeking.
Thank you, Michelle, very much for your honesty and your willingness to share about your experience, and as well as provide guidance for our viewers as well on this topic.
Thanks for having me.
So now I am going to give everyone some time for any questions that they have. And if there are no questions, you can relay any questions to our community relations department at the following email address, nkaplan@ccpa.net, or you can also call us for any further information regarding this program. And I can also email the authors about any further questions.
I don't have any questions.
Okay. Do any of the authors have any questions or any further advice?
Amy, I'd like to know how your Amish friend prepares bear meat.
Oh, me too. I'll have to ask her that.
Not that I'm looking for recipes. This is just morbid curiosity.
Yeah, me too.
So I grew up in Pennsylvania, and the only way I've ever had bear meat cooked is over a spit. Have you ever had roasted pig cooked over a spit?
I
Oh, no.
have.
Yes.
That's the only way I've ever had bear meat was it was roasted over a spit like a pig was roasted over a spit, and it was delicious.
Oh, okay. Cool.
File that one away for later.
Yes.
Yeah,
Right,
I would like to be in touch with both Gina and Amy. I'm also a chapter leader for the Nonfiction Authors Association in Pennsylvania, and so I would love for both of you to be guests to talk to other authors about your journey and specifically about marketing. That seems to be one of the biggest tripping points for any author. So I'll be in touch.
I'd love that.
That sounds great.
It's been so nice meeting all of you, and thank you for allowing me to step in for Suzanne today. This has been a lot of fun.
Yes, I appreciate everyone for taking the time and being willing to share their life experiences and just give guidance to everyone on spirituality and faith. And we will have this recording available on Facebook as well for everyone to view. And I will also email the links and resources that we have, as well as the authors' websites and their information.
Great.
That sounds great. Thanks for having us, Natalie.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie.
Thank you as
Thank
well.